I've never told anyone this story. It feels a bit silly now, looking back, but for a long time, it was my biggest secret. When I was younger, I fell completely and totally in love with someone who had no idea I even existed in that way. He was my older brother's friend. You probably know the type of T1 who's a few years older, impossibly cool, and just kind. He was always so polite to me, in this gentle, unassuming way that made my teenage heart flutter. He'd say hello, maybe ask how school was going, and that was it. To him, I was just the little sister, a kid in the background of his life, but to me, he was the main character. He was everything. I knew his schedule without even trying to memorize it. I knew which days he'd come over after school to play video games with my brother. And you can bet I'd find an excuse to be in the living room at that exact time, pretending to read a book or do homework, just to catch a glimpse of him. I'd hang on every word he said, even if he was just talking about some new band or a test he'd aced. I saved text messages that he sent to my brother, messages he wouldn't even remember sending 5 minutes later. There was this one time he smiled directly at me, not a polite nod, but a real, genuine smile, because I'd made some dumb joke. I swear, that smile powered me through the entire week. It was like the sun had decided to shine just for me. My love for him was a silent one. I never confessed. I never even dropped a hint. The thought of it was terrifying. What would I even say? He saw me as a kid. The rejection would have been more than just embarrassing. It would have felt like shattering this perfect little world I had built in my head. So, I told myself that loving him from a distance was enough. It was my own little secret, a source of quiet joy and heartache that belonged only to me. I would write about him in my journal, create entire scenarios in my mind where he'd finally see me, but in real life, I remained invisible. And for a long time, that was okay. It was safe. Life, as it always does, moved on. He went off to college, and the visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. My brother and I grew up, and our lives took different paths. I finished high school, went to college myself, and started building a life of my own. I dated other people. I had my heart broken, and I broke a few hearts in return. The intense, all-consuming crush I had on him faded into a gentle, nostalgic memory. He became a closed chapter, a sweet, silly story from my youth that I'd occasionally remember with a fond smile. I honestly believed I would never see him again, or if I did, it would just be an awkward, polite hello at a wedding or some other distant social event. The universe, however, had other plans. Years passed. I was in my mid-20s, navigating the chaotic world of my first real job and trying to figure out who I was as an adult. One evening, I was out with a group of friends at a quiet bar downtown, and then I saw him. He was across the room, talking to someone. He looked different, of course. Older, more mature, with a tiredness around his eyes that I recognized in myself. But it was him. My heart did this weird little jump, a phantom echo of the feeling I used to have all the time. I almost hid, my first instinct being the shy teenager I once was. But I took a breath and stayed put. A few minutes later, our eyes met. He squinted for a second, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. And then he smiled and started walking over. "Hey," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "You're Mark's little sister, right?" I laughed. "I have a name, you know." He looked genuinely embarrassed. "Sorry, of course. It's just wow, it's been a long time. You look so different." And that was the word. Different. The way he looked at me wasn't the way he used to. He wasn't looking at a kid anymore. He was looking at a woman, a contemporary. He was looking at me. For the first time, it felt like he was actually seeing me as a person, not just an extension of my brother. It was a strange and powerful feeling. We ended up talking for hours that night. We moved away from our respective groups and found a quiet corner. It was surprisingly easy. There was no awkwardness, none of the frantic nervousness I used to feel. We talked about everything. Our jobs, the pressures of adult life, the dreams we had in high school, versus the reality we were living now. We talked about feeling lonely even when surrounded by people. He told me about a tough breakup he'd gone through, and I told him about my struggles with my career. He listened, really listened. At one point, he said something that nearly made me fall off my stool. He said, "You know, I always thought you were so quiet back then, but you were always watching everything. You seemed so strong, in your own way." I had to laugh. If only he knew that my quietness was just a shield for the hurricane of emotions I felt every time he was in the room. We started seeing each other after that night. It began with casual coffees, which turned into dinners, which turned into spending entire weekends together. It was slow, and natural, and utterly terrifying in a completely new way. The old feelings, the ones I thought were long buried, started to surface again, but this time, they weren't one-sided. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the way he'd reach for my hand. He was falling for me, and I was falling all over again, but this time, it was real. One evening, we were sitting on my couch, watching a movie, and he turned to me, looking serious. He admitted, with a nervous tremor in his voice, that he was developing strong feelings for me. He said he couldn't stop thinking about me, and that he was scared of messing things up. As he spoke, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. He looked panicked, thinking he'd said the wrong thing. I shook my head and managed a watery smile. The tears weren't for his confession. They weren't because I had won some imaginary game from my childhood. I was crying because of the beautiful, painful irony of it all. Here he was, my first love, telling me he was falling for me, and he had absolutely no idea that my heart had belonged to him for a decade before he ever even noticed me. He had no clue about the years of silent pining, the journal entries, the carefully orchestrated accidental encounters. To him, our story was just beginning. To me, it was the culmination of a lifetime of waiting. I never told him. I've thought about it many times, but the words never feel right. How do you explain that kind of long-lost, adolescent love without sounding a little crazy? Some truths, I've realized, are best left as secrets, not because they're shameful or painful, but because their beauty lies in their silence. My love for him back then was a pure, untouched thing that got me through some lonely years. It belonged to the girl I was, and I want to let her keep it. Sharing it now would feel like changing the past, and the past is what led us here. What we have now is different. It's real. It's built on who we are today, not on the ghosts of who we used to be. Sometimes, love isn't about perfect timing. It's about patience. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, it waits for you to grow into it. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had a secret crush, maybe you'll understand. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.